All right, welcome everybody. So today is the second session of your beginner bee class, and today we're going to cover honeybee biology, and then Roger's going to get up and talk about reading combs, which is really important. You pull a comb, frame out of a hive to understand what's going on. A lot of what you need to do in your bee hive can be know by just looking at it. But we'll start with honeybee biology. And I always like to talk off by putting things a little bit in perspective. So there are over 20,000 different bee species in the world. 4,000 bees are native to the United States. And so all the pictures here you'll see are either pictures of honeybees. So there's 8 different species of honeybees, or they're native bees to Ohio. Anybody tell me choose the picture of the honeybee that we keep as beekeepers, one species. Veteran beekeepers. Why?
Top center.
Nope. We help you out. Click on that. All of these bees can be found in Ohio. All of these bees are honeybees. So which one is the honeybee we keep?
The one on purple bar.
Yeah, this is the honeybee we keep. The Western honeybee, Apis mellifera. What you've seen here is a map of its current distribution is in yellow. Its native range is in red. And this is another species of honeybee that is actually kept in parts of Asia, Apis cerana. But does anybody notice something unique or different? Specifically, like look towards one hemisphere of the world. This bee is not native to any of the Americas, right? But it's been here a super long time, right? So probably sometime around the 15th or 16th century, it was brought over with either English or Spanish settlers and pretty much took off like wildfire. So we did have a honeybee species in the Americas a very long time ago, but it died out. Okay, so talk a little bit about insect anatomy. So we'll talk about external anatomy first. So honeybee is an insect. Insects have 3 body segments: a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. On the head, you have 2 types of eyes. So you have compound eyes, and those are the eyes that you're going to be able to see on a bee. Bees see in UV and polarized light. So I'm sure most people have seen examples of these, but when you're looking at flowers, this is what humans see, this is what bees see. So it's actually pretty different. A lot of times flowers are colored in a certain way to try to advertise to bees, hey, this is where the nectar is. They kind of guide the bee to where the nectar is. So when you're painting boxes, be careful about the color that you paint them, because sometimes bees just see what we would see as red, bees would see as black. So you have 2 compound eyes, and then they have 3 simple eyes called ocelli. And these eyes are used primarily for light detection. Also on the head, you have the antennae. The antennae are really important for bees. They do a lot. They use them for touch, and they also use them for detecting pheromones and smell. And I don't know, I was probably years into beekeeping when it dawned on me, or somebody told me, that for the majority of the time, the inside of a honeybee hive is completely dark. Right? There's no light. Bees like it dark. So when they're in the hive, they use they use pheromone and smell for communication. They also don't have like ears, but they can feel vibration. So a lot of times they'll communicate by a waggle dance, and that will be vibration and touch. Also on the head, you have mandibles. So we'll talk about later, bees, unlike many other species of wasps, hornets, they actually secrete their own wax and build their own foundation. Wasps and hornets have to go out and chew up wood, and that's what you see hanging up in a tree. Bees make their own home, and they use these mandibles to chew up that wax and form the pattern that you see known like a honeybee cover. They also use the mandibles to chew out when they first emerge. They're capped under wax. They'll use their mandibles to chew too. And then finally on the head, you have a proboscis. So this is the honeybee's tongue. It's like a straw, and it's helpful to suck up nectar. On the thorax, you see where the wings attach. Bees have two pairs of wings. They have forewings and hind wings. Forewings are a little bit bigger. And then also, a lot of times, bees on their thorax, at least new bees, they'll be really, really hairy. And this hair plays a bunch of important roles, which we'll talk about later. But one interesting thing about bees is they actually have a little bit of a electrical charge to them. And flowers have the opposite charge. So when a bee goes and lands on a flower, that hair is actually attracting the pollen. Not a lot of charge, but it's just a little bit. But this is what makes bees really a good pollinator. And then finally, you have the abdomen. On the abdomen, you have spiracles, which we'll talk a little bit more about. But bees don't have lungs like we do. They don't have a closed circulatory system, so they don't have veins and arteries like we do. They have an open circulatory system. So the bees are actually, this is where they breathe. And then I didn't think that this diagram did a good justice of this, but bees also have specialized hairs on their legs that allow them to collect pollen. And what you see here in this picture is a bunch of different pollen granules that the bee has gone to flowers. She gets coated in pollen, she cleans herself off, and she puts these pollen on her back legs and what beekeepers commonly call pollen baskets. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about internal anatomy. So remember what I was talking about, the thorax here. The majority of the thorax is just muscle. It's a lot of muscle for those wings to fly. Bees have kind of like a nervous system. So they have a brain, they have a ganglia. So that's kind of like their central nervous system. Bees have 3 different stomachs. They have a foregut, a midgut, and hindgut. The foregut is often called the honey crop or the crop. That is where when bees go out and they get nectar, they can store that nectar in their foregut or honey crop. And there's actually a valve here between the foregut and midgut that closes that allows the bees then to come back to the hive and regurgitate that honey. If they're going to actually eat it, this valve will open and it'll pass through the midgut and the hindgut. The bees have a rectum and an anus. So we were talking a little bit about this early, but if anybody's got bees, and this is going to be your first spring with bees, just know that the next couple of warm days, you're probably going to see your bees out flying, and what they're doing is taking a cleansing flight. They're going to go out and use the bathroom. Bees don't use the bathroom in their hive, and if they do, that's probably a good sign that something is going wrong. So like I said, bees have an open circulatory system, and so what you don't see here is most of this will be filled, the bee's body cavity will be filled with blood. It's called hemolymph. How the bees breathe is through those spiracles, and those spiracles are connected to the trachea, and these are basically tubes that do gas exchange. So breathe in, take in oxygen, and exhale or export CO2. And it works by a process of diffusion. So again, there's not something that's actively breathing in, taking the oxygen to the cells in the bee. It just works like as a passive system. Bees have wax glands on their abdomen. So what this bee is doing right now is making wax and she's secreting it. So what she'll do, these wax glands produce wax, she'll flake them off. She'll then chew these up in her mouth parts and then form that honeycomb. And finally, the business end of the abdomen, stinger apparatus. So up here is a microscope slide of what the stinger actually looks like on a bee. When a female bee stings you, her stinger is barbed and she will leave that stinger in you. Okay. What you might not know is that stinger is still functioning. So there's muscles in that stinging apparatus that are contracting, pushing more and more venom into your skin or into your body. So it's probably pretty important, or if you don't want to feel as much pain, to get that stinger out as quickly as you possibly can. And you can just use your hive tool or some sharpener and just kind of scrape.
Don't pinch it, because all you do is push more venom through the stinger.
So let's talk about the honeybee life cycle. I'm a biologist by trade, so like I geek out a little bit on this stuff. So we're just going to go over a little bit of terminology. Yeah.
Does the stinger grow back?
No. So I'm sorry. Once she stings you, that stinging apparatus right here sticks with you, and she, because she has an open circulatory system, all that hemolymph that's in her abdomen has no way to stay in her body, so she bleeds out and dies. This is actually pretty good for the beekeeper, because really these bees do not want to sting you. They know that they're going to die if they sting you. A lot of times, people are afraid of honeybees. You really don't have to be, because these bees are way less aggressive because they know that they got one chance. They will sting you. You will get stung, but
Stinging's like their last defense. They'll warn you ahead of time usually.
a lot of times, yeah, you
But
pop open.
stinging's the last defense, whereas yellow jackets can sting you multiple times, so they don't give a crap. Stinging's the first thing they do.
A lot of times, when you open up a hive, if it's going to be a bad day, you open up a hive and you'll get bees just drilling you in the back. And that's really, bees want to sting. If they're going to sting you, they want to go for the face. They know the sensitive parts. And so that's what they're trying to do. They're just trying to hit your face to kind of try to warn you. They'll give you a good peck before they actually sting. So bees, we're going to talk about the bees life cycle. We're going to talk about the difference between complete and incomplete metamorphosis. So bees go through what's called complete metamorphosis. There's an egg stage, a larval stage, a pupal stage, and an adult stage. That's different than incomplete metamorphosis, which is what a varroa mite goes through. Now, you all thought that you were going to just be beekeepers, but I'm here to tell you, you're going to be beekeepers and mite keepers. Okay, you will all have mites in your hive. It's a fact of life, and it's really important to understand not only the bee's life cycle, but the varroa mite's life cycle. Knowing the biology will help you control the mite. So the mite is a parasite on the bee, and it's different. Its life cycle is different than the bees. Usually, what happens is that the foundress mite will come in off of a bee, either from another hive, or she's attached herself from a bee that was nectaring on a flower, or the drones. And she knows that she's going to detach herself and feed on a larvae, but she waits until a pretty old larvae, just about the time that larvae is going to turn or start pupating and get capped. Okay. That drone knows that if the bees find her, they're going to try to get rid of her. So she waits and hides till that cell is capped over. She comes up and she starts feeding on the larva. After a little bit of time, she lays her first egg. That egg is a male. It's always a male. I shouldn't say always, but majority of the time it's a male. About every 30 hours, she lays another egg. All of those eggs are female. As days go by, mite lays more and more eggs. And what's showing the difference between this first bee that's merging and this bigger bee here is this is a worker bee. This is a male bee. Worker bees emerge earlier than male bees. Mites yeah.
Give them a time frame from egg, larva to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's it. They won't-
If you look real close, I know it's hard to see, but these are days. So this is day 1 all the way up to day 24. Okay. Mites like to go on and feed on male larvae because it takes them a little bit longer time to develop. And that gives that mite a chance to actually lay 2 or 3 more eggs. She gets more offspring. I should say that these daughter mites, they mate with their brother before they leave the hive or leave on the bee. And the only difference between incomplete and complete metamorphosis is that instead of larval stages, mites go through nymphal stages, which are just smaller. They just look like smaller versions of the adults. Right? So this is just a video of the honeybee's life cycle. So you can see that now they're in these cells. There's little larvae. They're growing. They're getting fed. They're going through their life cycle.
Yeah, I can move it to the top. No, it's
So here you can see the days from which they were first made. So what you're seeing here is there's a bunch of different instar stages or different sizes of larvae. Okay? So they start out really, really small. Talk about eggs. Eggs are really difficult to see in the rain. These larvae just keep getting bigger and bigger. When they get to this stage, they're pretty easy to see because you know that that's an older stage larvae. You're about to see pupation, so they're going to go pupae here. You can see right here that this bee actually kind of, I think it has starts having a face, starts looking more like a bee. Then you can see pigments start developing in their eyes. So sometimes you'll hear people refer to pupae as eyes, purple eyes. They're talking about how developed that Again, we're starting to see purple eyes. They have one thing to note, and we talk about the ranges of the stages. This is the many ones we don't have. Ideal condition would be it's sped up a little bit. So then you start seeing some mutations here. Okay, so you all probably know that there's different types of bees in your hive, right? You have a caste system. So you have a queen bee, you have drones, and you have workers. Now, this is one of probably the coolest, in my opinion, aspects of the bee biology. The difference between a female and a male bee is the number of chromosomes that they have. So in humans, we have a chromosome, one set of chromosomes that determine whether or not we are born with female reproductive parts or born with male reproductive parts. Bees, it's different. Bees, if you have 2 sets of chromosomes, you are a female. If you have 1 set of chromosomes, you are a male. We call this haploid diploid. And that's a really cool word to say. And then I'm going to tell you a fact, the coolest fact I'm going to tell you all night about bees, and I guarantee you at the office tomorrow or wherever you work, you will say this to one of your coworkers. This results in a phenomenon where male bees, they have grandfathers, but they do not have fathers. Okay. Think about it. So this is what determines the gender of the bee. If they're diploid, having 2 sets of chromosomes, they'll be female. If they're haploid, or 1 set of chromosomes, they'll be male. There's also one other very cool thing that determines this caste system, and that is the difference between a worker bee and a queen bee. Now, worker bees will consist of about 90% of your bees in your colony in the summer. Drones will be about 10%, but in the wintertime, there will be no drones. We'll talk about why that is. The workers kick them out. And then there's just one queen typically in the hive. So the queen is the mother of the hive, but it's not a true caste system where the queen makes all the decisions. A lot of decisions are made by workers. So the difference between queens and workers is basically nutrition. So what is pictured here is 2 queen larvae. I know that they're queen larvae because they're swimming in royal jelly. When honeybees make queens, they feed those queens royal jelly, and they feed them in an excessive amount. They give them so much food that the larvae can't even eat it. Workers, they don't get so lucky. All right, they don't get as much food. So genetically speaking, a queen and a worker are the same. They have the same genetics. So in a hive, when you get a virgin queen that emerges, you get a worker bee that comes out. Those 2 bees are sisters. They're genetically same. The difference is this nutrition. For anybody that's interested, that's a term called epigenetics. It means above genetics, right?
But workers can lay eggs or only queens lay eggs?
Workers can lay eggs, but those eggs will only be made drones. Okay. And
Because they didn't mate. The worker bee never made it, so she has no sperm to fertilize an egg. So basically, drones are come from unfertilized eggs. All the females come from fertilized eggs.
yes. So the development of these different types of bees takes different time. Okay. What you'll notice is all the eggs are the same. They're in the egg stage all the same amount of time. Larval stage is pretty similar, plus or minus a day, basically. The big difference is in the pupal stage. But what you'll see here is queens take the least amount of time. And that's because they get fed the most amount of food. And also, when honeybees are making a queen, they need a queen. They're not going to mess around. They're going to try to get this queen developed as quickly as possible. Also, when a queen emerges, she can't lay eggs immediately. She's got to go take a mating flight. She's actually got to hang out in the hive for several days. She's got to go take a mating flight. So while I might see, I can make a queen in 16 days, and my hive will be all set, ready to go. It takes a lot longer than that to get a good established mated laying queen. Again, you'll see though that drones take the longest to develop. And again, remember, that's important for our mite control. So let's talk about each one of these different types of bees. We'll start off with the queen. So on this video here, you'll see a queen bee just doing her thing. So this kind of gives you insight into what Roger's going to talk about later, about breeding frames. But you can watch her going around, she's laying eggs and stuff. And attending to her work. For new beekeepers, all I'll say is different. So here she is again, another picture up here on the top left. What you kind of probably can't see is a very recommended photo of the worker bee attending to it. So the queen is really pumping out eggs. She can lay up to 3,000 eggs a day. Lay up half a million eggs at a time. And she has a lifespan anywhere from 6 nowadays are pretty common. And you delve into some of the reasons why that is for genetics and stuff. You know, once you get your hive set up, you might think, oh man, I'm doing good, I'm ready to go. Eventually your queen will be replaced either by you or by the bees. So this is a diagram of the queen's reproductive organs. So these big things here are her ovaries, where she stores the eggs. And probably pretty hard to see, but this little ball thing right in the middle, it's called a spermatheca. This is where she stores the sperm, and she can decide whether or not to fertilize an egg or lay a fertilized egg or lay an unfertilized egg. So she can give this, an egg will come down, she can either fertilize it, give it some sperm, or she will let it pass and lay with no sperm at all, and that will result in a male bee. She does have a stinger, but unlike worker bees, that stinger is smooth. So she can actually sting multiple times, and she won't lose her stinger. And has anybody been stung by a queen in here? Experienced beekeepers? Yeah, she can sting, but that's primarily, she's going to sting out her other competition. She's going to sting out other new queens when she emerges. Queens develop in what we call queen cells. You can tell a queen, it's pretty distinctive, right? You can see the difference between a queen cell and all these different cells. The one dead giveaway is all queen cells are pointing down. They're going to be pointing down. Okay. These queen cells, as the bee larvae gets bigger and bigger, this queen cell will start extending more and more, and they will eventually cap it. So here in this second picture, you can see different stages of queen cells. And when the hive or colony decides to make queens, they will make multiple queens. They're not just making one. Okay. Queens will emerge through the bottom of the cell with a little trap door. Again, she's going to use her mandibles here to cut out the bottom. This picture, right? I should say, if you're worried about swarming, so when your bees will, 2/3 of your hive will leave your box, a swarm. If you're worried about that, we'll talk more about it later. If you see a capped queen cell, you're in trouble. They might have swarmed, or they're real close to swarm. So swarm management is a really tough thing to do. It's not the end of the world if you lose a swarm. It's happened to everybody. What this picture shows down here is you see one queen cell where the queen emerged from the bottom. All these different queen cells, this queen has gone over and killed out her competition. Okay, so this will be, if you have a swarm or if you see this, there has been a queen that has emerged and she's gone through and killed all her sister queens. I'm sure Roger will speak more to this a little bit, but where a queen cell is on your frame can tell you a lot about what has happened in your colony. If you see them kind of towards the bottom, on the edge of your on your comb, a lot of times that will indicate to you a swarm. Okay, and so a lot of beekeepers will call these swarm cells. If it's in the middle of a brood frame, just step right in the middle, it's probably a supersedure cell. So that queen bee has probably died. You may have killed her. She might have just started failing, and the colony's going to requeen her. But if it's in the middle, those worker bees has taken what would have been another worker bee and turned it into a queen.
So what happens if you have a friend that has both on? Just a confused hive?
They do that to confuse the beekeepers.
Yeah. They don't always listen. You know, they haven't taken this class yet.
It happens.
Because that's what happened with Emma. Her first year is her queen was gone, and she had a couple of frames that had
Queen cells
the
on them.
cells on the top or through the middle and on the bottom.
At that point, I usually tell people, just let Mother Nature take its course. I mean, a lot of times the bees know what they're doing. And us beekeepers, we think we know what we're doing. All we do is confuse them or screw them up because let's take the top picture. You come in and go, I'm gonna prevent swarming. I'm gonna cut all these queen cells out. But you, after you cut them all out, you realize that maybe the old queen, they've already swarmed. You just didn't read the colony correctly. They've already swarmed. So now you cut every queen cell out. So now they have no ability to raise another queen cell because they have no eggs in there. All the eggs have hatched. They're too far along. You cut the queen cell out that they got started. If it's capped, we're looking at about day 9. So you've just shot yourself in the foot.
That's what she did. She just shut it up and let nature take
Yep,
its course.
that's what unless you can find the queen in there, but you gotta remember, when it's swarming, that hive is usually jam-packed with bees and it's very, very difficult to find a queen. I mean, you might get lucky. I usually don't spend too much time. If I see queen cells that far along, and more of an advanced thing is Dave and I and experienced beekeepers will take that frame out with some bees, and maybe another one, and start another hive. But we always make sure you leave I always leave 2 queen cells in the hive, take some queen cells out. Now I can make 3 or 4 hives out of that one.
You scrape it off.
Nope, I just take the whole frame and all. Frame all the bees that are hanging on it, the honey that's on it, the brood, everything.
What Roger's doing there is he's simulating a swarm. He's doing what those bees want to do. But instead of letting those bees go up in a tree somewhere, he's getting them, he's taking them.
Part of it, and I'm sure Dave will say the same thing, is the way I started doing that is it was an insurance policy. Because are you going to talk about where the queen mates? We'll let him talk. I'll finish the story in a little bit. I don't want to take his punchline away.
More about queens.
It's brutal in there. As you can see, that queen emerges and the first thing she does is go around and kill her sisters before they can be the queen. So it's brutal in there.
So one
And
thing that,
usually they'll open up that peanut, as a lot of us caught, on the side. And so it's real obvious that if the cap's off the bottom, that's freshly hatched queen, where if it's been attacked on the side of that peanut, that's one that she's killed.
Yep, those are all killed. Either she stung through there and killed it, and then the bees opened it up to take the dead bee out, the dead queen out, because they can tell that it's dead, or she chewed it. I'm not sure exactly who does the chewing, if it's the queen or the workers. But when they're open on the side, those died a brutal death.
that fight. Yeah.
That was part of a fight.
Yeah.
So, and since they start most of these all at the same time, they emerge before she can go around and kill her competition. So then they have a slugfest, and queens will fight, try to sting each other till they can sting and kill one another. So usually the bees get involved about that time, because sometimes the worker bees will pick a winner. They like your smell better than your smell. So we're gonna ball you, and the bees just attack that queen and superheat it and basically cook it to death. And because they like you better.
Go ahead.
If you're lucky, you can be there when they're thinking about coming out. You can hear, my son can hear better. I wear hearing aids. I don't always hear it. But you can hear the chirping sound when they're about to come out. And it is neat when you get one over here chirping and one over here chirping, because it's game on.
It's called piping, and the first one out starts piping, so the other ones respond, so she knows where they're at. Gail was with me one day, and it's like I stopped, and she goes, "What's going on?" I go, "Listen," and you just wait a little bit, and you hear this, and it's a certain buzz, and it's beep, 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 like that. It's like Morse code, and they all sound beep, 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 just like that. And sometimes when they're emerging, I've caught them and take them home. because I got queens hatching. Well, I ran out of cages one day and put two brand new queens in the same container. And within seconds, they are fighting. And they would walk across the can, grab each other, wrestle, and then separate a little bit. And it was about like a boxing match. They would walk around a little bit and then all of a sudden, so it was like, Jesus, girls, you're only like 15, you're 3 minutes old and you're already fighting. It's like, all right, grab you out and find something to put you in. Yeah, I mean, within seconds, they're already fighting. I figured, they won't bother each other. They're just brand new, young, you know. I got at least 5 minutes in here. Moo.
So when you get into your hive in the spring, because that's typically swarm season, and you have frames that look like that in the middle, top, that's when you would pull one of those frames and stick it in a nook to prevent.
Well,
to
If
prevent-
you want more bees.
trying to prevent a little swarm. They're probably going to swarm once, like Jake said, once they cap that, they've already made up their mind. No matter what you do, they're going to swarm.
Okay.
And they may have already swarmed or they're right on the verge of swarming. So I'm trying to hedge my bets a little bit. I want, if that queen doesn't make it back from her mating flight, maybe this one will.
Yeah.
And I can recombine. So I still got a queen.
So
Because
those two valuable things you can have, strong comb and spare queen. Always have a set yourself up.
Because I was going to let him finish and I'll talk about insurance policy.
One thing, I don't know if anybody else does this, but because of the fighting so much, if you're worried about your queens, your hives get superseded, or you want to make new, if I had all these queen cells here, I would eliminate a couple. I leave two queen cells in. But
Last year I had 8 queen cells and I cut out 6 of them, left the 2 biggest ones, so I knew I'd have the best queen on that frame. The other ones I put into a container and let them hatch out there. And then I placed the bigger ones, the first ones that came out into different. See, there's different methods.
But that's getting a little more advanced than like the first year beekeepers.
Yeah, right. Just get them to survive the first year.
Yeah.
first winter.
yeah, but the another issue about swarming is they want to swarm right when the honey comes up. They like to swarm when times are good, not when it's convenient for you as a beekeeper. First year beekeepers, they like to swarm, like you're saying, in the spring, as things too, because you don't have a lot of experience. That's why Roger mentioned in first class, you should be in your hive every week. You should know, you have an idea of what you're trying to do in your hive, but to get experience, you should be in it every week.
And one more thing, if I could.
Yep.
I don't know when I realized this. Somebody told me this in maybe my second year. When you're in the hive, looking at what the bees are doing, but in your head, you have to think about what the bees are going to be doing in a week or 10 days or 2 weeks. Because, you know, just like I said, they're getting ready to swarm. If you're in your hive the week before the flow starts, and you're seeing a lot of bees, and you're seeing everything cooking, and you're thinking in your head, I'm doing great. Well, in another week, that flow might start, and those bees are gonna get crowded, and then all of a sudden, they're gonna think, we better get out of here, you know, it's just too tight. So you have to kind of pre-plan. And if you look in your hive and it's weak, then you have to kind of start thinking, I have to do something to shore them up a little bit, I gotta help them somehow. If you're looking in your hive and it's, you know, really strong, then you gotta think, okay, I might have to make some adjustments here. So you have to be about a week or 10 days, because you'll learn eventually what not to do.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, you learn a lot of times by just not doing it.
That's coming with experience too. I mean, the first time when most people open up their hive and they pick up that frame and there's 500, maybe 1,000 bees on that frame, that's freaked out enough. You know, it's like a lot of people go brain dead at that point. Like, what am I supposed to look at? Is the queen on here? And Gail's a newer beekeeper. She can probably explain that from a very new beekeeper.
When you go through these classes and you're learning, I myself found that when I went out to visit the colony, you get so focused on looking for one thing, but there's multiple things that you have to look at while you're in there. And you being, first time beekeeper, you're like, okay, they told me I have to look for this and this and this. There's like a sheet you have to go through. And sometimes it's not always that way. And if you spend too much time, then you make them mad because you're so focused on trying to look for something.
Tunnel
Yeah.
vision.
Tunnel
Tunnel
vision.
vision gets everybody into it. And people do that with queen cells. They see that queen cell and they automatically go, oh, I got it. Somebody told me somewhere, you got to cut all these out. They cut them all out. But you never heard that from me because I don't tell you that. But they cut them all out but they don't look to see if the queen's still in there. Is she still laying eggs? Is there small larvae in there? So there's so much going on when you open up your hive.
And that's, I mean, you all that are here you're in the right place. You're taking the good first steps. I will say that, if they're willing, get these experienced beekeepers' numbers. A picture, you could send a text to Roger of a frame and he could tell you. I can't tell you how many times I've called Roger and I've explained to him what's happened and he can tell me all the mistakes that I made that I should have done the previous week. It's invaluable for beginner beekeepers to have somebody that's done it several times. They'll tell you right away what you.
I'm just telling you, I'm telling him the mistake I made 15 years ago.
Right.
We've all done them.
All right, moving on to drones. Again, drones are the male bees. They look quite different than the workers. A lot of times people mistake drones for queens. Queens have an elongated abdomen right here, right? But the drone bees are kind of like a little bit fatter, squatty abdomen. So they're bigger than worker bees. And I guarantee you'll be like, that's the queen. It's probably a drone. Drones have big eyes. And the reason why they have big eyes is because drones have two purposes in life: to eat and to mate. They're sperm with wings. That's all they're there.
Just like all men, right?
I didn't say.
The male chauvinistic pig in the hive.
Yep.
So what drones do when times are good in bee season, they actually will go out to what we call drone congregation areas where there's a bunch of different drones hanging out. And they'll hang out there for a while and they'll come back to the hive, get some food. They get fed by the worker bees, go back out to the hive, and that's their life. That's what they do. And what they're doing at this drone congregation area is they're looking for a virgin queen. So when that queen emerges from that queen cell, she stays in the hive, she gets her flight muscles ready to go and everything. And then eventually she'll take what we call maiden flight. Okay, so she will go out in search of these drone congregation areas. What happens then is those drones will see her and they'll fly to try to catch her. So they actually mate in the air. And what happens when a drone mates, it takes a huge amount of the blood, the hemolymph for the drone to their reproductive parts are internal. Takes a lot of blood to make them external. So that bee actually falls over backwards. He mates with the queen. His reproductive organs actually stay in the queen, and then he falls off and he dies. That is the end of the drone's life. This reproductive organ actually plays a key role in signaling to other drones where the queen is. So the queen does not mate with just one drone. She mates with as many drones as she can, right? So, yeah.
In other words, she's a true slut.
But this is good for the beekeeper. You want a well-mated queen. You do not want a queen that just mated with one drone, although she has enough sperm for that one drone for her entire life. She could be fine with just one mating, but we want as many matings to occur as possible. That gives you better genetics, okay? When it comes time in the winter, late fall, the worker bees kind of figure out, hey, we're not getting a lot of food back into the hive anymore. So we got to kind of cut resources. They kick the drones out. They can actually kill them. But they boot them out of the hive and the drones kind of just hang out until they die off in the wintertime. So in the wintertime, there are exceptions, but in the wintertime, you're not gonna have any of these bees in here. That's it for drones. That's all they do.
They'll actually see the girls pulling them out of the hive, pulling them out. Yeah.
Oh, it's brutal.
I guess if I was as good with a PowerPoint as Jacob is, I got video of drones getting drug out.
Do you really?
I could play videos and put them in here and play with you, but yeah.
I watched a video of that and I thought about putting it in, but it's kind of traumatizing for me, so I decided I
Being a male.
Okay, so drones develop in cells that are a little bit different. Roger's gonna get into this a lot more, so I'm not gonna steal what he's gonna talk about. But this up top here are worker cells. These are drone cells, okay? So they look different. So when you're reading the comb, you can tell the difference between what a drone cell is, what a male bee is gonna emerge from, and what a female bee is gonna emerge from. Kim talked about this last night. He talked about drone management for your varroa mites, okay? So all the cells that are in here are made for workers, but there are specific frames that are made just to produce drones, okay? And if you don't want to use chemicals in your hives, drone management, and you're a hobbyist beekeeper, Roger, David could not do that. If you're a hobbyist beekeeper and you're really attentive, this could be a really good way to control for those varroa mites. Because remember, they like to go on drone. Okay, I have a question for you. How do honey, and we talked about this a little bit, but how do honeybees reproduce? They lay, yeah, so that was the answer I was expecting, right? They lay an egg turns into larvae, pupae, adult. That is not what the bees are in the business of doing. Bees are not in the business of making more bees. They are in the business of making more colonies, okay? So if I had one book to recommend to you, it would be this book, Honeybee Democracy by Tom Seeley. If you're not a book reader, just type in Tom Seeley to YouTube. The guy is amazing, okay? But Tom talks about a superorganism. Superorganisms are individuals that make up an actual organism, okay? So what you can think about is individual bees in a colony as cells in your body. So when I'm talking about colonies, I'm talking about just what we got finished on talking about. Making more queens. Queens get made, the swarm occurs, there's another colony. When a swarm happens, 2/3 of the colony go with the old queen, 1/3 of the colony stays with this new queen that's gonna go out and get mated. And that is the birth of a new colony. Okay, that is how bees reproduce. This is how you can make more colonies. Okay. Finally, let's talk about workers. So workers are the driving force in your colonies. They do almost everything. But they engage in this division of labor or temporal polytheism. But what that basically means is, depending on the age of the bee, they have different tasks. So a lot of times you'll hear us talk about, there's a bunch of nurse bees or something like that. It's because we're talking about different types of tasks that the bees are doing in our colonies. And this is a lot depending on gland development. So when a bee first emerges, they don't have everything developed yet. So they got to take in some food. There's still some things that are developing in their body. So a very new baby bee up here, she's very hairy. Looks really yellow to me. She's got a lot of hair. You can tell that that's a newly emerged bee. That bee will not be able to sting you. Their sting apparatus is not developed yet. And in the first couple of days, she won't even be able to fly. So what she's stuck doing is she's cleaning and labor. So she's going to go around and clean out cells and get them ready for the queen to lay. Then around 3 to 5 days, she's going to start caring for her baby sister. She's going to start taking care of that other larvae, that brood that's in the nest. 6 to 11 days, she's going to do royal task, so she's gonna start taking care of the queen. She's gonna feed the queen. And then a little bit later on in their lives, bees will start doing guarding and cooling. So this is another really cool concept of the superorganism. Bees are cold-blooded, but colonies are warm-blooded. Okay, so bee can't regulate its own temperature, but the bees can regulate the temperature in the colony. And they do that by cooling or warming up in the wintertime. We talk about a cluster. That's what our bees are probably still in. They're in a cluster. They're trying to stay warm. Guarding. These are the bees that when you pop open your cover, they're popping you in the bed. Their job is to protect the hive. Okay. You'll know these bees will know you very well. How many experienced beekeepers in here, every time you walk out an apiary, you have that one bee that is following you all the way back. You're a mile away, you've closed up the hive, everything's done for the day, and there is still one bee that just will not let it go. It's every time I open up. That one bee. She's guarded. And then towards the end of their lives, bees actually move out of the hive and they start doing the things that we all know and have great pictures of, right? They go out and they collect 4 different things. This is my last question of the day. What are the 4 things that honeybees collect? All in the nectar, you got the 2 easy ones. Water and sap, resin. Yep. Bees collect water for cooling. And they also drink. Nectar and pollen are their food sources. And then resin, we talked about propolis yesterday, and propolis is made from trees. These are the 4 things that those bees will have. All right, does anybody have questions?
Some of what I'm gonna talk about, we're gonna double up here because Jake set his video up and I had my video, and I'm gonna try. I like to stand and talk, but there's things I'm gonna have to point out on the PowerPoint for the people that are on Zoom back home, so they can see what I'm pointing at. So when you're using the laser pointer in here, they can't see that. So I'm gonna try this. You know, we're always improvising. And Jake basically talked about the different life periods of the bees. So we talked about the eggs. Eggs are on the bottom, eggs for 3 days. That egg hatches into a very small larvae. And you can see these 2 larvae here are really small. And to be honest, when that egg hatches into a larvae, that larvae is smaller than the egg. So, and that is the larvae when you hear about people making queens and grafting queens, that is the larvae they're using. It's that little small one that you can't see. So the larvae just keep growing, and you can see they get bigger, bigger, bigger till they're as big as the cell ready to be capped over. So as I look, this is not my picture, but it's a larvae for 6 days. So here's day 1, day 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You can see how it grows. Just keeps getting bigger and bigger. One of the things, you know, we talk about everybody always wants to find the queen. When you're a brand new beekeeper, you want to make sure that queen's still in there. Well, finding that queen in 30, 40,000 bees can be a nearly impossible job. But if I know the life cycle of the bee, it's an egg for 3 days. So the queen was there for 3 days ago to lay that egg. Larvae keep getting bigger. There's another 6 days. If I haven't been in that hive for a week, that's 7 days. We just covered 6 as a larvae, 3 as an egg, that's 9. So they're overlapping. So the big larvae up here on top were eggs the last time you were in your hive. So you don't have to find your queen to know that she's still in there doing her work. I look for small larvae, probably in this range. I look for eggs. Again, we're talking about a dark background. This is an ideal picture. I mean, I wish David and I both wish eggs looked that easy to see.
Let's put it this way, the only way I've ever seen eggs to this day is on brand new black plastic that they just started She went through and they put a chunk of wax down. She came right back behind them and laid eggs. That's the only way I've ever been able to see eggs.
So looking for smaller, mid-sized larvae, like in this row here, is probably the easiest way. If I find small larvae, you know, that's 3, 6, about 6 days ago that was laid. We're good. Find some more eggs. I'm good to go. I know the queen's still laying, especially if everything's, a lot of times you can see the white bee food or the royal jelly, depends on the stage, laying in the bottom. That's easy to see. You can see that white laying in there. You know, there's a little larvae in there. So much of what the bees do is all by pheromone. So Jake said, the hive's dark. It's dark all the time, 24/7. But every stage of larvae gives off a different smell. So the other bees know how big that larvae is, who has to feed it. When it's hungry, it gives off another smell. When they're hungry, everything in that hive is driven by smells. And when you go on Facebook or YouTube or whatever, and people want to put in some kind of essential oil, hey, I read on Facebook that putting in lemongrass oil will get rid of the mites. Well, you're also putting in some artificial smells that are screwing up with all their smells that are in that hive and how they work, because everything they do is driven by a smell. The queen smells different than the worker bees. So their antennae are like their noses, and that drives everything in that hive and what goes on and a lot of things. So even a lot of the mitocytes that we use have smells, and it probably really screws it up. Same with smoke. That's why you want to use just a little amount of smoke to get your job done. You don't have to smoke it like Barry the Bee movie. If you ever seen that, the beekeeper come in and it was like a forest fire coming out of his smoker, and he was smoking the crap out of them. We don't smoke that way, just a little bit to get it done, because if you put too much in there, now you're screwing up with all their pheromone smells that are making their hive operate correctly. So it's one thing to think about. But when I go in a hive, I'm looking for mainly eggs or larvae, but this is back to the checklist of everything that you got going on. You want to check for this, you want to check for that, and tunnel vision can be a real issue. These are older larvae, they're getting bigger, but the cap larvae on both sides, see how they're domed up? They aren't real nice and flat. Those are drones. The drones come from a bigger cell. It looks like a cobblestone road where they're at. So these are going to be drones, but when they're in the larvae stage, they look just like worker bees till really the day they cap that over. About the day before they cap it, you know that larvae is really big, and it usually the cell starts to elongate a little bit. But for the most part, till they cap it over, you don't know if that queen's laying drones or if she's been fertilized good and laying girls. This is one of my pictures. This is just a frame. We got drone cells on the outside. Now, she didn't lay worker eggs in here. This was all the drone in the corners, the middle, kind of a funky. This isn't an ideal frame. Probably why I took a picture of it. But the dark's where she laid drones. The bees want to have so many drones, especially in swarm season. They need boy bees. They keep boy bees in there all summer long in case something happens to the queen. They got to raise a new queen. They got boys to do the other half of the job. We as beekeepers put 100% worker brood in, worker frames, so that we try to make them all girls, but they want some boys. So if they have the choice, they will build. They store pollen, usually close to the brood. This center here, the color that looks orangey color, that is all stored pollen in a frame. So when you look in your frames, you'll need to look to see if they're storing pollen for their protein. Nectar is their carbohydrates. They make that into honey. They usually store that in that same area. So when you're inspecting your hive, you want to make sure there's honey in there pollen in there. Is the queen doing her job, laying eggs? I'm gonna guess the way this frame looks, see how white the top is? They had honey in there, never had pollen. The pollen will make your combs dark. The reason the drone comb where they were raising drones in that hive, when that drone hatches or any bee hatches, some of the cocoon that was spun during pupation is left behind. And after a couple cycles of that, makes your combs look dark. Where they store honey, I'm sure Dave can say this, I've got honey frames that are probably 15 years old. They've had honey in them 15 years and they're still white. They
It's
do.
15? I got probably some that are 20 or 30 from Fritz.
Well, I probably have some too, but it never gets dark because they've never raised baby bees in it. And they've always kept honey in it. So they usually stays lighter color. So I'm sure there was some light up there.
So they'll choose which frames to do work.
This frame, I'm gonna guess, this frame was either damaged by the bees or a mouse chewed the corners out. If you get a mouse in the wintertime, they always chew a hole in and the bees almost always will fill that back in with drone because they need that drone area, so they'll fill it with drone. The drone cells are bigger. So Jake's little film of that queen running around laying eggs, a lot of times what the queen does is she goes around and she sticks her head in the cell first. She sticks her head in, she looks to make sure it's clean, and she uses her antennas to measure it. Then she turns around and lays, if it's a big cell like those drones, she turns around and lays an unfertilized egg because she's going to lay a boy in there. If she measures it and it's small, she turns around and lays a fertilized egg. So the queen measures up. You will not see that in a hive. I've witnessed this by taking an observation hive to the fair and watching what a queen will do. And she'll go around. Sometimes she'll just walk over the cell and back up and lay an egg in it. Sometimes she'll stick her head in and you watch her turn around. And if there's anybody there, I go, watch the queen. She's going to lay an egg. And she turns around and she kind of backs in and squats down. And I timed the queen one day. 17 seconds. She would back in and she was out in 17 seconds. She laid like 10 eggs and I just kept timing her. 17. She was a 17 girl. But I mean, that's what the queen is basically an egg laying machine. That's all. That's her job, is to lay eggs. She's not technically the queen as in the queen mother, like we think of the British queen. She's an egg laying machine. The workers are in charge of everything else in that hive. Here we got a hive, here's another frame. We got bees on it. The bees are gathered in a couple corners. Does anybody know why the bees are conjugated where they're at? No, there's honey in the corners. So I probably pulled this frame out, and even just pulling it out will get them just like smoking. So let's say you smoke your hive a little bit, you will drive the bees to the honey because they start gorging themselves. That's what the honey kind of does. The honey or the smoke drives them to gorge because we think there's evolution through fire, the forest fires. They'll gorge themselves full of food. So if their house burns down, they got a belly full of food to start the next house. So they gorge on that open nectar. So the bees will run to that open nectar and start gorging themselves. In the center here a little bit, there's some capped brood. And on the big picture up here, it's hard to see, but there's some open brood around the outside of it. So there's no honey there. So they've kind of let that go. We're going to gorge ourselves for a little bit. Capped honey on the outside.
So in the 2 corners.
Yep, that's capped honey then.
Capped.
So they have capped honey and uncapped honey. And the uncapped honey is a lot easier to eat. If you would smoke them hard enough, give them enough time, they'd probably chew some of the cappings off. Once they clean everything else, you can see a little pollen in the corner. And what bees usually do is they have a dome, and the queen lays eggs down in the bottom of the dome. Then there's a band of pollen above there. and that's their protein that the worker bees eat so they can make royal jelly and bee food to feed the larvae underneath them. And then there's honey on the outside. So in a big dome, there's honey, pollen, eggs, or larvae. So when you open up a hive, there's going to be, and the hard part of teaching all this, and when I was going through doing these frames, I'm thinking, oh man, am I going to talk over everybody's heads? Is this going to get too technical? But you got to learn where things are going on. Bees usually store honey on the outside of the hive. In the middle, they're going to be doing things like this. And there's almost always honey in the corner of the frames. Very seldom do you see a whole frame that's east to west, north to south, up and down, right to left, solid brood. There's always up in the corners, something going on. Here's a close-up, same picture. I kind of zoomed in. You can see some larvae in there. If you go out further, once I see little larvae, if you keep going out, the queen usually lays some eggs. She goes to the next frame, and it's like a 3D ball in that hive. So even though this frame, we got frames sitting this way, you got to think of that ball doing this inside that hive. So she's going like 3 frames this way and about the same distance this way. So if I look on there, she laid this today, she laid this the next day, and let's say 3 days, her dome's this big. So you go out, yep, here's some big larvae, here's some little larvae, here's some eggs. Her ball in the dome just keeps getting bigger. So that's one trick of trying to find eggs, know where to look. Those are eggs at the bottom of the cell. I know they're really hard to see, and that's what eggs are all about. They're hard to see. You need sunlight and looks down in the bottom. That egg stands up on the bottom of the cell. So when the cell is just like that, you can see right in the middle, there's an egg in the middle of each one of those cells. So there's an egg right in the middle. That's where the queen lays her eggs, right in the middle. But you got to look down in the bottom. So you got to get in the sunlight. Let the sun shine over your shoulder so the sun's coming down so you can kind of look down. And I don't know how many new beekeepers I've handed them a frame and go, you got eggs in here, and they'll start doing this, and then I'll take them and turn them to get the sun over their shoulder. Because most people will look in front of you like this, and your shadow's shadowing the frame. So you got to get the frame kind of up over your shoulder so you can see down in. Jake talked a little bit about queen cups. The difference between a queen cup and a queen cell is the bees always have some queen cups hanging around. They're just there. And we think part of it is in case of an emergency and Mr. Beekeeper or Miss Beekeeper kills that queen, they've already got a cell started, so they will move a larvae into that so they can start their new queen. So they always have some hanging around. They're usually in a defect of the frame, up the top, in the middle, hanging here, and there's just nothing in it. You look in it, it's empty. They have no intention of making a swarm. It's not, and some races of bees, the Russians, seem to have lots of cups just sitting around, just waiting. But it's just part, you can cut that out, and you're just making more work for the bees because they'll probably just build another cup back in there, like going, damn it, I put this there for a reason, just leave it there. So they just have cups hanging around. Again, here's some older foundation. Here's some really black foundation. The shiny stuff up in here is bee bread. The bees collect pollen. And if they don't eat it right away and they want to store it for future use, they mix a little honey with it, and it kind of ferments just a touch on them. But that's their way of preserving pollen for future use. And that pollen will usually have a shine to it. So when you pick that frame up and look at it, and if it's orangey yellow with a little shine on it, the bees have started making bee bread with it. If it's real bright yellow or bright orange, really stands out, that's usually really fresh pollen that they're bringing in. But that's just storage for future use. What's my cursor? Larry was talking about his frame. How many queen cells did yours have?
Patty,
8. Mr. Beekeeper killed a queen one day. I didn't know it. I come back to this hive like a week later, and there was 2 frames with queen cells on it, and they don't raise just one queen. They know they got to raise a bunch because they're playing the odds. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 on one side of one frame of queen cells. So they were busy. And these are back to supersedure or emergency cells. They're all hanging around the bottom of that cat brood. This is all cat brood up here. And these all hang down here because those were the last eggs that the queen had laid, and so that's where, when they realized the queen's not there anymore, we got to start raising queens. That was where the larvae were the proper size for them to raise some queens. Back to everything has a smell. You take that queen out of a hive, and good bees within several hours know the queen's gone, and they'll be in a panic to raise a new queen because they know they need a queen. So they get into action. Some of the other things I see on this frame, see these vertical lines here? They're evenly spaced. That's because there's wire on real farm. There's some vertical lines in there. It's because there's wires there. The queen didn't want to lay on top of that wire. And a lot of times, if you're using real foundation where those wires lay, the queen won't lay for maybe once or twice. You got to break the cell in. I don't know. Other things that goes on in a hive. I know this was summertime, but early in the spring, you'll see a brood pattern with lots of little holes in it. And those are heater holes. The bees have to keep their brood at 92 degrees. So what happens is they will leave an empty hole. A worker bee will get in there, twitch its wing muscles to warm up, and it warms the area around it. The bees also cover the outside to keep the babies warm. But when it's really cold or cool, they use these holes. So a lot of times those are just heater holes. If the queen starts to fail, she'll get real spotty, and it'll be like a hit and miss with where she lays eggs. That's usually when she starts to fail. But a few holes is no big deal. I know this frame's going to come up again. Here's queen cells, like Jake said, 2 queen cells hanging on the bottom. Looks like swarm cells. Those are getting ready to swarm. Usually swarms because they need somewhere to hang that peanut down. So that's why they hang them on the bottom. Worker brood along here. Got some cat brood or drone brood up here, and worker brood. Couple queen cells. Things you're going to look at. Here, queen cells are hanging at the top. Back to, another supersedure, probably an emergency. It's another one of my pictures. So they got things going on. If I pull that frame out, I know there's things going on. Looks like the last of the brood's hatching around here. It's probably all empty. Looks like they've been queenless for probably a week or so, probably 2 weeks since that one's capped. I do use some of my old pictures. There's a nice cap queen cell. There we look at when the queen emerges. See the trap door? That's classic. That queen crawled out, but those other 2 also crawled out. Just the trap door is already gone. So the queens have come out. So there's 3 of them. There's going to be there was a fight in there somewhere. But the little trap door is a very good indication. I think the next one. Yeah, here's some things going on. Here's a cell that was chewed, and there's another cell in here. It's right in here. Right here, you can see the edge chewed off. Jake had a lot better pictures than I have, but this is one of my frames. Orangey stuff up in here. what is the orangey stuff? The pollen. So they got lots of stored pollen here, bees around. So you pull this out, you look, that queen emerged. If I open up a hive and the queens have emerged like that, I just put it back together. You know, I'm gonna let the bees slug it out. I'm gonna let the queen slug it out. I'm gonna let that queen go out and get mated. A lot of times when those new virgin queens are running in there, they're trying to set their territory. So I'm the new queen. So I'm gonna let all the girls over here know that I'm the new queen. I'm passing my smells around. But if I get spooked and run to the other side of the hive and you guys know there hasn't been a queen here and we don't know who you are, the queen can get killed by running to the other side of the hive. It's like running to the bad neighborhood, but crossing the tracks, exactly. So I don't want this queen just running helter-skelter because she's been in the dark her whole life and now all of a sudden she's in the sunlight. They have a tendency to run. The queens emerge. There's nothing I can do here. I'm going to let Mother Nature take its course. I put it back together and wait about 2 to 3 weeks. Don't even get excited. And probably most of the phone calls I get from Jake is, yeah, I've had this queen emerge and what time do you think she'll get mated and this? And 9 times out of 10, when the beekeeper calls me and asks me, you know, my queen's emerged and I go, wait another week, take another look, see if you see eggs then. And almost 9 out of 10 times, the queen comes back, starts laying eggs, everything worked perfect. But most of the time, beekeepers love to jump the gun. So, but like I said, at that point, there's nothing I can really do. Dave, anything?
Oh, I agree with everything you just said. I mean, the biggest concern that people end up having is, oh gee, I don't see a queen. I'm afraid it's going to turn into a worker hive. And it's one of those things where you just kind of gotta cross yourself and pray that it all works out. And if it doesn't, you back up and punt.
So that's what, I don't know if you're here, this Dave just alluded to is the colony goes queenless for so long that queen pheromone actually suppresses the worker's ovaries and she can't lay eggs. Once that queen's gone for so long, workers, a worker will start laying eggs. Those eggs will only be drones. And so your hive, if that happens, eventually workers do all the work.
So just back to all the pheromones in the hive. Brood pheromone suppresses the workers from laying eggs. So once all the brood hatches, there's no more brood pheromone in there. And after about 2 weeks of that, the workers' ovaries will kick in, they'll lay eggs. Now that turns into a real mess. So we try to avoid that if we can.
Like Roger alluded to before, you don't see the queen there, don't go looking at every frame, because if she's in there, you may have squishing her, then you'd be in real deep. Do that. You give it another 6 to 10 days, come back and look for it.
Yeah. You know, the bees usually tear down those cells after a while. If they don't, I usually cut them out. That way I don't, the next time I go in the hive, there's not queen cells in there. And even though I keep notes, back to tunnel vision, my brain, the computer needs to be rebooted or something in my brain. Here's a little bit closer up of that cell that the bees have chewed. There's something else on there, and Jake alluded to that with the mating of the queen. Bees of different color. That's part of the genetic mix in the hive with the different, one queen, so we have one mom, multiple dads. So this bee here is different color than these bees here. So different dad. And usually you'll see that quite a bit. I don't see too many more. I got some more pictures of that. I encourage people to start out with a little foundation because once you get a handle on what the bees are doing, you can go to foundation list, but it takes a trick and sometimes the bees don't read the book. This was a frame that the bees just kind of hung their comb helter-skelter on.
You want to reference that to what the inspector's gonna look for when he comes in? He wants to see all nice straight comb, nothing helter skelter.
Well, it makes their life a lot easier. To the people that were on the call last night with that Zoom with the log, that log is illegal in Ohio because in Ohio you have to, your colonies have to have removable frames so you can inspect them. So you can't inspect that log. Now, if the log's in your woods and it's a wild hive, that's okay, but as you having that, always put all the frames in your box. Because the day you don't is you forget it. And when you come back, you know, like a week later or 2 weeks later, and the box won't come apart, it's because the bees filled that gap with comb. And I've done this way too many times. And every time I do something like this, I tell myself, never, ever do that again. Till
Next week, you do it all over.
till it's the middle of the summer and I can't figure out why the inner cover won't come off and there's only 2 frames in there and 2 missing ones. And then the nuke next to it, it's got the exact same thing because I only had 4 frames. I needed 8. So I'll be back in a couple days and put these frames in.
And don't think you can get away with, if you have deep frames and you want to put a medium in there just for a week, just for a filler, then you forget about it. They'll start filling.
And it looks just like this. So always put the right number of frames in, the right size. Too much gap. Sometimes your equipment doesn't fit right. This was a shim so I could put some miticide in, but the bees filled that gap because there was still a honey flow on. So they filled it and they put the comb in whatever way they want. You know, that's the bee's design. Reading the frames. When you pop your top off and it's glued to the frames just like this, is because the bees are out of space. They're telling you we're out of room, the cupboard's full, and we need to put an addition on. Same thing, the honey flows on, they don't know when to stop working, so they just start jamming honey wherever they can figure out where to put it. So there's a little bit extra gap between the inner cover and those frames. They jam it up with honey, and now when you break that loose, you got a sticky mess. If it's early in the spring, they'll jam that area full of drone brood because they're looking to put some drone in there. These are drone brood. It's not wax moth. I'll see people online, they'll break their colony apart like this and they're freaking out because they think they got wax moth in it. It's just drone brood. Also, Jake talked a little bit about pink and purple eye. Can you see these drones right here? Their eyes are starting to turn purple. So that would be a purple eye drone. And it's going to hatch in about 3 days, but you can see the bees will use all the space they can. This is also telling you we're out of space and we need a little more room. They're probably getting ready to swarm. So it's kind of reading. They'll put some wax there, but it's the bees telling you that we need more space. When they store nectar, it's always nice and shiny, glistening. You see the glistening in the middle. We got bees of a little bit different color. We got some lighter ones, some darker ones in the middle. Here's a drone area. The bees hate storing honey in drone brood. I think the surface area is so big that the nectar likes to run back out. So that's the last place they'll make honey. So here we got some open drone. We got honey being capped over, or nectar being stored and dried, made into honey over here.
And the drone and the female bees, it's bigger
Yep.
too, right?
Yep, so you can see those openings are a little bit bigger where there's no honey. All right, what's everybody see on this frame? Got some capped honey. Shh.
Yeah.
Jay got it. There's a queen on the bottom here. Right here, you got the queen walking on capped honey now. The book will tell you that this is a frame of honey. The queen shouldn't be on this frame. But that's why you gotta assume every frame that you pull out, you gotta assume the queen's on there because the queen didn't read the book that says she's not supposed to be over here, but she may be out of area in her brood area to lay eggs, so she's hunting for a place to lay eggs. So they will walk across honey now and then. We got different color bees. This one's different color from this one to this one. So we got a lot of bee diversity in this hive. I'll look at that and go, oh, good, I got a good queen. I got, oh, looky here, here's my queen walking across here. When you pick that frame out and you do see that queen on it, that's like, be super, super careful. You put that frame, somehow you get another frame out so you can put her in a big area so you can slide her in. Make sure you don't squish her, move that frame over gently, and then where she's not, put everything back together, but you don't want to smash her.
More advanced, I usually grab the queen, move her over 3 or 4 frames. So it's plenty.
Yep. A lot of people say the wings are handles, but practice picking up drones. Touch a drone, he'll usually stick his wings up and you can grab them, move them. Once you get good at moving drones, because they can't sting you or anything, do a few worker bees. The queens are the hardest ones. I don't care what anybody says. As soon as if you bump that queen, when you try to grab her and you miss her, she's sprinting now. And she's gonna run underneath the other bees, she's gonna hide. So you got like one chance to grab her. When that one chance is up, then you play hell. When I open up one of my hives, I look on the top, we open up the hive, look on the inner cover. The queen may be on the inner cover. Make sure she's not there before you put it off the side. I look down between my frames. When the first thing, it doesn't matter if I'm in the honey super or if I'm in my brood box. I look between the frames to see what I can see. Can I see bees here? Here's a honey super. I'm going to look down. I'm going to look in there and go, I see capped honey. Every frame it's got capped honey. I bet these are capped. Maybe I'll pull one out. Maybe I'll take it, lift it up. Oh, it's capped on the bottom. I know that whole box is capped. I don't have to pull the frames out to tell myself, oh, all these got nice capped honey in there. I look between the frames to see what's going on. I look between the frames to see if there's queen cells, if there's capped brood. Sometimes I'm raising some queens. I want to know if she's laying any eggs. I'll look between there. Oh, look at that. I can see capped brood. Oh, my queen's laying eggs. Put the lid back on. Go to the next one. I don't need to pull everything out. Make sure the queen, that way I don't take that chance of smashing the queen. It goes a little quicker. But I like to look between my frames. And that's kind of what this showing. It's capped top to bottom. Way I go. What's everybody seeing on this frame? I know it's not the best picture. It's because it's not mine. We got a bunch of capped worker brood in the middle, big dome. See, we got our dome going on here. It's all capped in the middle. The bees are conjugated on the outside, so I bet there's some open nectar there. We got capped honey on the outside corners. That's really, really white. Capped brood's a little browner because it's spun wax. If we could have a real good close-up, we would see big open brood here getting ready to cap, and the further out you go, there'll be smaller and smaller brood. So this is like a perfect dome of brood.
This is a beautiful frame. This is an example of like, this is a great. If you pull the frame out like this, you're happy with it.
Yep. You can see the queen hit just about all the holes. There's a few skips. Were they heater holes? Did the queen miss it? Maybe there was something wrong with that larvae. The bees sense sick, dying larvae. Hygienic bees will pull that larvae out, haul it outside, get rid of it. So it end up being empty. That's part of our hygienics that we're fighting with the mites is the mites, we have bees that can sense that that larvae is injured underneath the cap, the bees uncap it, either pull that whole larvae out or pull the mite out, get rid of it. And that's how they control mites. Might smell. What do we see on this picture? Experienced beekeepers keep their mouth shut. Gail?
Can't see back there far enough anyways.
Got nectar. Correct. There's nectar in those cells. Who's this? Who's this one? Gotcha. That's a drone. Big eyes, fat body, because over here is the queen. Right there, long and slender, fat and stubby. Here's another drone up in the corner right here is a drone. He's got a different dad, or it sure looks different dad, but he had a different grandpa.
What are they doing there? Are they eating or are they just in the way?
Eating and getting in the way.
I'm gonna say eating and getting in the way. Because this honey, there looks like there's some empty cells here, but there's glistening and honey in here. So, and the queen's probably at this point, like, get the hell out of my way. It's light out. I want to go back to the dark. But drones, like I said, it takes a long time for you to pick out the queens over the drones. And they're squatty, and just think about their whole head is almost all eyeballs. So drones and a queen. Cap brood, worker brood all up on top, and some drones down at the bottom. The difference between cap brood and of drone and worker bees. More cap brood. It's nice to see the cap brood. It's brown. It's not glistening. Here's the baby bee, like Jake was talking about, how they're real fuzzy. They're really light colored. When they first hatch, they're almost white. They don't even turn yellow yet, but they'll look fuzzy and real light color. That bee probably just crawled out of that cell. What do you guys see on this picture? Bees. Anybody?
There's a yellow dot on a queen in there.
Yep. We got a yellow dotted queen. This is an older worker bee. See how this bee right next to it is real light colored. We got a light colored one here. These bees are emerging. In fact, I think right there is a bee chewing its way out. The bees chew out head first. They come out head first. They chew that capping off and they walk out. So they're hatching. The queen's on this frame. She's getting ready to lay eggs. She's laying eggs as fast as they emerge out. So she's probably running out of room. I think they're just young worker bees and old worker bees on this. Here's an older one. Like I said, some young ones. They're whitish color. Something you need to read. There are, back to like what the book says, if you pick out a frame, we're going to go back two. If I pull that frame out, the chances of finding a queen on there are very slim because there's no place for the queen to lay eggs. She's usually someplace where she can lay eggs. So on that frame, it's all full of cap brood. There's no place for the queen to lay eggs. She's probably not there. I'll do a quick look, but chances of finding her there are slim. Same with when you pull one out and it's full of honey. If it's full of honey, there's no place for the queen to lay eggs. She's probably not there. You go on. When I pull out a frame that has a bunch of open space, the bees are hanging. There's one I'm going to take a little more time on to look for the queen if I want to find the queen. She's got to have some place to lay eggs. Same with this one. Here's a lot of open cells. We got different colors of bees.
underneath the bottom corner.
So springtime, when it's swarming season and they know they need to raise lots of drones, they'll put some along there. I usually scrape that off. I'll get the bees off, either brush them, shake the frame. I also blow on them a lot. Bees don't like our breath. So I got the frame in my hand. I can hold it one-handed, run the brush. Maybe can I run the smoker and hold it? It's usually pretty hard, so I hold it and I blow on them just a little bit. The bees will scatter. If they don't scatter the first time, I blow a little harder. If I get all the bees off there, I usually take my hive tool, and if it's just all drone, scrape that back off so my frames will slide in and out a lot easier without dragging. One of the problems is all that drone brood sticks out a little bit. So now your queens happens to be on that frame the next time you pull that out. And when you pull that out, they run out of space, and now she gets jammed against the next frame, and that's how queens get killed. You want to be able to pull that frame out nice and easy when it slide in and out without gouging the frames on either side. A lot of times what we recommend is pulling the outside frame out because she's very seldom there. It's usually honey. Now you can slide all the frames over a little bit so you can get frames out. You can work your hive a lot easier.
So I think Roger hit it on a good point. That's probably a pretty difficult thing for beginner keepers to do, is getting that first frame out without messing up other frames. They like to stick those frames down into that box. So it's important to take your time. A lot of beginner keepers will wear gloves because you don't want to get your hands done up. So it's got less dexterity there. It's a kind of a trick to get that first frame out without knocking it on the edge of the box or knocking it on. So just slow and steady.
And a lot of times, if I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm sure David does the same thing. I usually don't take the outside ones out. I keep my frames clean, but I will pull a middle frame where the queen may be or where there's brood. So I only pull one frame, look at it. But if I start moving it out and it won't move, it won't come up, put it down, find another one that will move out. But I clean my frames a lot. And you can look at these bees and go, yep, there's some drone brood down at the bottom. But who is hiding right here in the middle? Mama queen, right here in the middle. The girls are even taking care of her because they're all here facing her. These are feeding her. So her entourage is around her, but when they're all the same color, they can hide very easy. So that's why it's so hard to find the queen on there, even when you're looking. That's why when I find a queen in one of my hives, it's more of an accident than purpose. I don't look for them, but every once in a while, you find them. You run across her. We got queen cells here. This frame has all kinds of things going on. This frame came out of a brand new beginner hive that the lady was in a very bad car accident, couldn't take care of her bees, and was a package. And they didn't like the old queen, so they're superseding her. So I got drone brood over here. See how it's all dimpled up. Not very much worker. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 queen cells.
And on plastic too?
This is on plastic. The bees didn't adhere the wax to the plastic, so they rehung it. It's kind of like hanging a wall not attached to the studs. Just let's tack some drywall to the ceiling and the floor, and we're going to call that a wall. It doesn't work. I had quite the mess there. The other hive she had was completely queenless. So what I did is I very gently cut these 2 queen cells out, put them in the other hive, and she ended up with 2 queens. But they need a lot more work. I'm gonna, once we turn the lights on, I'm about done with this, show you what happens when you don't wax your foundation. If you got plastic foundation, you need a bunch of wax on it.
That's part of the problem with being a package. That you got a queen that's not used to those bees. These pick the queen over here, put it in a little container, put it in a box of bees and they ship it to you. And they're not just that queen, so part of the problem may have been that they rejected that queen right off the bat.
Well, they let her lay some eggs, but that's,
Yeah, they let 'em some.
but that's what a lot of packages do. The longer you're in this business, the more, when they're raising these queens at the big package places, they're raising thousands and thousands of queens, all to be ready on the same day. If they don't have enough drones, they don't get mated properly, so they lay a few eggs. And I see there's somebody doing a study, Randy Oliver's doing a study on supersedure of package queens. So it's out there. It's a problem with packages.
And you might think, oh, I can save $50 because it's very expensive, but as a first-year beekeeper, you really want all the advantages that you can get. And having a veteran beekeeper give you 5 frames, a foundation, some brood, some honey, it's going to get you off to a much better start.
This is cat brood, worker brood on the, make sure your right's my right, on the right, and drone brood on the left. Jake talked about pollen on the bee. You know, here's bee flying with pollen. We stole the same picture. Pollen comes in many different colors. This is some pollen that I trapped different times of the year. So, and it can do this color change within a week. One week they're in orange and yellow pollen and white. The next week they're in brown, black, and yellow. Different flowers, different colors of pollen. Pollen comes in about every color underneath the sun. So looks like a rainbow. They first start packing it in. You can see the little grains. There's some nectar on this frame that's shiny. The dollar stuff, yellow, brown, is pollen that they're storing in the cells. And when they got lots of it, that's what it looks like. I mean, lots of orange pollen, a little bit of nectar, last of the brood. So they're backfilling. We would call this backfilling. This could become a problem because, again, the queen has nowhere to lay eggs. So they're filling the hive up with pollen and nectar. The queen doesn't have any place to lay eggs. That's something that triggers swarming when they run out of room. The books will tell you that bees only store just a little bit of pollen, but in Northwest Ohio, they store it by the frame and the truckloads. And we throw frames away where other parts of the country, they probably would die for. So it's just location, location, location. Here you can see it's that colored pollen has a little bit of shine to it. It's where they've mixed the honey with it.
You can trap pollen.
You're saying that you end up throwing out frames of pollen.
Eventually, because cursor gets stuck. Oop, wrong way. That's honey. Eventually, sometimes like over a 2 or 3 year period, maybe you got 2 or 3 frames in your out of 10 that are just pollen, and there's just no room for the queen. So I need to make room for the queen.
Last year, somebody else pushed.
But they won't eat it later, you don't refill it.
There's just so much of it, they won't eat it all.
It's too much.
You could,
That or, for lack of a better word, it almost spoils,
yeah,
coat it out. where
yeah, they'll
they-
put propolis over it sometimes. Maybe there's something wrong. Maybe they stored a bunch and it gets old, they don't like it. They like the fresher pollen more than when it gets really old.
So you can't really winter it or whatever. I mean, like with honey, you can keep.
Yeah.
honey frames.
No, some people will give them to like a nuke when you first get a nuke because that will kick them in gear, but they only can eat so much. And so once it gets really old, they'll just kind of cap it over, and very seldom do they use it. It'll just sit there for years and years and years. So you're better off to cycle the frame back out. It's old. Hopefully they don't do it
That's the
brand
one
new.
big push that they, especially on brood frames, that's been going on for the last 5 to 10 years, maybe even a little longer than that, of trying to cycle brood frames out every 5 years. just because of the chemicals that's potentially collected and stored in those frames in general.
Wax absorbs a lot of things, so the chemicals that the bees come in contact with are all disposed in that wax and it sucks in and stays there. Brood, glistening honey, frame of honey. Whoops. Honey. Drone brood, probably open honey. Where the bees are on, there's open honey. Let's speed through these. This is what happens when people don't assemble frames correctly. There's nothing worse than having a gooey mess because the bottom board pulled off because the bees stuck it to the other frame. If you assemble your own equipment, make sure all the nails are down. You can see this person air nailed these and left these nails up. I can guarantee that those are going to be stabbers and you're going to draw blood on them someday. This wasn't my frame, but I was helping this person. So if you invite me over and see me, I have my camera out. There might be a reason why I'm taking a picture for a slideshow someday. Bottom boards come apart just because these weren't assembled right. But since this bottom part of the frame is not unattached and not cracked in there, now we violated bee space. So now we have dead bees being smashed by putting the bottom boards back on. So you can see there's some smashed bees on this frame that's unnailed. So. Oh, no, because I build my stuff correctly. And these usually are not mine. Like this nail is a guy I was helping. And then he had back surgery, so I had to help him without him helping me. And that's when I took pictures of his equipment that wasn't nailed correctly the whole time. He wasn't there. Yeah, if you, right. And when you build correctly, you usually don't have a problem. Same with this. This is, I call her a client. I take care of her. She pays for everything and she pays me to be her beekeeper. But she bought a bunch of this equipment, it doesn't fit right, and I keep pulling the bottom boards off. So I quit putting these frames back on. This frame's drawn out, it's on plastic foundation. I'm just leaving them anymore, but they break off. They're a pain in the butt. And they make a mess, so they get thrown out. But
A clue for you, you don't want to buy any equipment from Tractor Supply or any of the other farm supply houses, big box houses, because 99% of their stuff, especially their pre-assembled stuff, is pure junk.
they didn't nail the bottom. They nailed from the side, but they missed most of the bottom board. So they didn't even, they shot a nail in it, but they didn't nail it to anything. So it just hung there till the bees put a little wax on it and then I peel them off. And this is what happens. So then you got a frame that's broke and you got larvae on it or honey on it and it makes a mess. So that's it. That frame is not mine, but I could see me doing that. This is something that happens when you put like your feeder inside a box and you forget about it for a long period of time. Put that here, put an empty box here so the bees can't rob it. And if you leave it go for like 3-4 weeks because you get busy, you'll come back to something like that. So, questions? Anybody? You guys gotta have some questions. Anybody at home got questions? Put them in the chat.
How come we don't have like issues with mold? Warm, hot, moist, and rain?
You do, but the bees manage most of it. I mean, like the bees clean most of that off.
Typically,
Like-
the only time you see mold is on old, I'm gonna call it older frames that you pulled out of the hive for whatever reason, or taking that box and put it in, say it's a dead out, and you put it in storage for a couple of months, come back, and gee, I got mold on it. The bees will clean that up in a couple of days and don't.
Bees will clean it off, but bees by being in there are kind of controlling the environment. They're the air moving, they move their wings. In the winter time, when the bees die, people will get mold in there because now the ventilation's quit. because they're all dead and they're usually wet. I'm cleaning up one of my dead hives today and they were just clear full of poop. I mean, you just touch them and they squirt poop out. So, I mean, they're just full of moisture. And that's where if I let this go for another month or so, they'd be moldy in
So if we get another round of warm days, open her up and see.
there. Well,
You wanna wait till it's consistent.
I
It's a
would,
little cold out.
well, she said the next time it warms up, but you can go out and you want to make sure your bees are alive? Take your glasses off, put your ear up against here, just as right tight. And most of the time you'll hear them buzzing because you've already vibrated. By the time you hit it with your ear, you've moved it a little bit and they'll start buzzing. If you don't hear anything, and I mean, this is all I do. And you'll hear them go, you'll hear the pitch change in there. You hear them? Oh, they're still alive. They're in there buzzing. That's all you do. That's all I do.
Yeah, a few days ago in the snow, you could just see all the dead bees. when they
Yeah,
carry some out.
If there's dead bees laying in the snow, that means somebody has hauled that dead bee out, carried it, dropped it, went back inside. That bee didn't get there by itself. If you keep seeing dead bees lay here and you keep scraping them out, they're still alive. Because once that swarm of bees up here dies in the wintertime, they quit falling down. They're just like stuck. So as long as there's always dead bees down here, that's a good sign because they're alive, they're moving, and the dead ones drop down. They're gonna constantly die. That's part of what goes on. But when you find them in the snow and stuff, that's a good sign.